Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is a new Google Nexus 7 tablet. Came out in 2013. It's a little bit thinner and lighter than the 2012 model, has a faster processor and more memory, and a slightly higher starting price, whereas last year's model came out at $199 and up. This one costs $229 and up. It's a little bit taller, you can see here, but it's also thinner and lighter, and you wouldn't think that would make a huge difference, but it does generally just sort of feel a little bit better in your hands, and it's about 2 ounces lighter, which it surprises me how much, after using this for a couple of days, picking up the older one feels a little heavier. Neither of them are heavy, and they're both pretty good tablets, but the new one is definitely a better model. Overall, what I wanted to sort of go over in this review is what you can do with the new tablet, and if you're in the market for a 7-inch tablet, it's probably one of the best options available right now. If you already have last year's model, there might not be a ton of reasons to upgrade, but if you're a stickler for screen resolution, speed, and a couple of other things, there might be a few good reasons to upgrade. So real quick, let's just go over a couple of the differences. 1920 by 1200 pixel display versus a 1280 by 800 pixel display. The new screen is also brighter and shows colors, about 30% more colors. And ultimately what that means is, even though the old one doesn't exactly look dull or washed out on its own, the new model definitely has a much better display. And that really comes into play not necessarily just when you're surfing the web or even looking at pictures, but when you're looking at things that really require high resolution detail. So I find, for instance, comic books just look much, much better on this new screen. And it's probably the first 7-inch tablet that I don't mind reading comic books on, and that's because you can sort of hold it very close and read the tiny, tiny text, and it looks pretty good. So even content like magazines and comic books that were really designed for 11-inch pieces of paper look pretty good on a 7-inch screen here. So you've got that. You've got 2 gigs of RAM instead of 1 gigabyte of RAM, and it also, the new model, has a rear camera in addition to a front-facing camera. So not only can you use it for Skype or other applications for video chat, you can take pictures. It's not a great camera, but it does exist, which is nice. We also have stereo speakers here on the back. It's not super easy to see in this lighting, I think, but there's an interesting array here. So there's software that basically emulates a surround sound system, and if you switch from landscape to portrait or back, the audio will actually change its configuration as well to sort of move with you. Stereo is useful to have, I think, on a device this small, but honestly, it's hard to tell the difference because the speakers aren't very far apart, and surround sound, I can barely tell that it's got surround sound, but it's a nice feature to have, I suppose, and it's reasonably loud. Since the speakers are on the back and they're sort of in the spot where you might hold it, the audio can get kind of muffled, but it's reasonably loud, and if you're using it to listen to music or do other things, it works pretty well. In terms of other things I like to do on a tablet, it makes a pretty great e-reader. Again, I had no problem reading books on the old version, but it's even more of a high-quality experience when you've got this excellent high-resolution display. And you can see that in terms of sort of the blacks, if you have a black background and white text, it almost looks like it's one solid piece, even though there's fairly thick edges around the bezel here on the sides. In terms of overall CPU performance, you can see I've got a couple of benchmarks on here. I ran a series of benchmarks, but they're not necessarily the best way to sort of gauge overall performance. It does score better than pretty much any tablet or phone that came out in 2012. It's not quite as fast as an HTC One or Samsung Galaxy S4, some of the newer phones, but it's pretty close on those benchmarks. But more importantly, most phones and tablets actually have slower processors, and what that means is you're not going to find a lot of apps that don't run on this. It's got a Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 Pro processor with Adreno 320 graphics. And what that means is that there might be a couple of games, for instance, that take advantage of NVIDIA Tegra 4 graphics that are going to look a little bit better on a device like the NVIDIA Shield gaming system, but most games work pretty well and everything's pretty responsive. Handles HD video very nicely, and let's just take a quick look at a game or two here. How do I make this go away? There we go. I think I might have turned the audio off on here. So you can see gaming works pretty well. These aren't necessarily the most graphically intensive games, but I've gotten kind of addicted to playing Wind Up Night on this device. It's a game that I'd played before, but there's something about this one that every time I sat down to read a book, I'd find myself playing Wind Up Night instead. These games load pretty quickly. And graphics look pretty good, audio's pretty good. And I'd forgotten how easy the first levels of this game are. Let's try something else here, a little Dead Trigger. Apparently I missed one. So games look pretty good. Let's do a quick video playback here. High definition video looks pretty good on this high definition screen.
USB cable. It's a fairly lengthy USB cable, which makes sense because it's really designed to be used.
And you can see we've got pretty wide viewing angles here as well.
Can I please speak to her? Hello?
So overall, I'm pretty impressed with this tablet. Again, it's a little bit more expensive than last year's model, but what you get is a faster processor, an extra camera, more memory, and a much, much better screen. If you have last year's model, the new Android 4.3 software update really sort of improves performance enough to the point where you might not really feel the need to upgrade. And I'm not necessarily a firm believer that you need to buy new devices every single year. But if you're in the market for a new tablet, I think this is probably one of the best 7-inch tablets you're likely to find for any price. And for $229 and up, it's a pretty great deal. It doesn't have everything. It doesn't have a micro SD card slot. I know some people really like to have expandable storage. With 16 gigs of built-in memory or storage, or 32 gigs, you might want to get the 32 gig option if you see yourself carrying a lot of videos, playing a lot of games, or doing other things that you might want to store a lot of data on the device. But if you sort of buy into Google's ecosystem of keeping a lot of things in the cloud using Google Drive or Google Play Movies and music and so forth, then that might not really be so much of an issue. And it also supports HDMI output if you have an adapter through the USB port. It's called a slim port. It's, speaking of slim, as I mentioned, is a little bit thinner than last year's model, a little bit lighter, and overall it works pretty nice. It also has wireless charging. It doesn't come with a wireless charger, but if you have a supported dock, you can just sort of slap it on the dock and it'll charge without any charging cables. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with the Nexus 7, the 2013 model. High-resolution screen, fast processor, and feels great in the hand. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing and a quick video review of the Google Nexus 7 for 2013. You can find more details, photos, and sort of performance results at liliputing.com.